Today, the Justice Department released the results of an over 14-month investigation of systemic bias and abuse in the Baltimore Police Department, and the results are devastating, confirming many of the things that we suspected were going on, that some of our guests, like Michael J. Wood, have talked about on the show. Our beliefs about some of the ways that police were choosing to operate, were not being stopped from operating in that fashion. Some of the abuses and the statistics are just shocking in this. So we have a lot of excerpts from this report. The entire report is over 160 pages, but you should look at it. But we're gonna touch on some of the most ridiculous points from this. And first, some stats. In Baltimore, a city that is 63% black, the Justice Department found that 91% of those arrested for discretionary offenses like failure to obey or trespassing were African American. Blacks make up 60% of Baltimore's drivers, but they account for 82% of traffic stops. And of the 410 pedestrians who were stopped at least 10 times in the 5.5 years of data reviewed, 95% were black. And the other 5% were white guys still wearing Tommy Hilfiger. So it was confusing to the police there.
Come on, let's be honest. Black people do not respect the pedestrian laws.
They
know
don't.
that.
No, loitering.
They're dancing.
Who dances outside?
Dancing across the street. I'm making light of this, but it's because I just read this and it's depressing.
Yeah, it's really shocking.
It's super depressing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that you think we wouldn't even want to believe are parts of the way that police talk amongst themselves that come out here. Things like failure to obey. I mean, even that, which is normal parlance. Yeah, rename it. By the way, you stepped on John's Tommy Hilfiger joke.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It wasn't that great.
Okay. But he's been working on it all day. So.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I should have said
the other 5%.
I don't want to repeat it.
It was a great joke.
It's a good joke.
I'm sorry.
I feel terrible.
It's all right. It's systemic.
Okay. Anyway, let's jump to some more material before we focus more on my attempts at comedy. Oh, by the way, so we said that the 95% of those stopped more than 10 times in 5.5 years. There were some examples, like there was a guy who in 4 years had been stopped more than 30 times. Never once had it resulted in any charges. They just keep inconveniencing you, stopping you, making you feel like an outsider in your own city. And imagine, I mean, I've been stopped by the police a couple of times in my entire life. Imagine 30 times in a couple-year period, and you've done nothing wrong the entire time.
I can't believe there's a big enough sample of people who've been stopped 10 or more times.
Yeah.
That's what's astonishing to me, too.
In one city.
In one city.
Just a few years.
15 of those stops of that guy who was stopped 30 times, 15 of them were for absolutely no reason. They said they were just checking on warrants, if he had warrants on him.
Yeah.
Those are half of the stops.
That seems indefensible right there.
We're going to set a stop and see if you were a criminal before.
That is profiling. That is what you call
just
profiling. That's what it is.
That's not even hiding the fact that you're profiling. Okay, more summary. Racially disparate impact is present at every stage of BPD's enforcement actions, from the initial decision to stop individuals on Baltimore streets to searches, arrests, and uses of force. These racial disparities, along with evidence suggesting intentional discrimination, erode the community trust that is critical to effective policing. And so that we're gonna give examples of that basically at every level of the interaction between the citizens of Baltimore and the police. But that is one of their overall conclusions. But here are a few ways that it manifests day to day. BPD searched African Americans more frequently during pedestrian and vehicle stops, even though searches of African Americans were less likely to discover contraband. Indeed, BPD officers found contraband twice as often when searching white individuals compared to African Americans during vehicle stops, and 50% more often during pedestrian stops. And that's the sort of data. I mean, we've been talking recently about how police departments around America have become more and more data focused, and they're just playing the numbers. Well, then they know that. They know that they're more likely to get contraband when they stop white people, and yet they're far more likely to stop black people, implying that contraband is not the goal.
Right. Hey, if you don't want to be harassed by the cops, just don't do anything while you're black.
Just don't be black.
That's all, because that's what they would say before. Like, just don't commit any crime. Well, he was running away when he got shot. Don't run away from the cop. Do what the cop sasays.
Yeah.
That's always the. Do what the cop said. I wasn't doing anything. Don't be black.
So what's the arc of correction here? I know there's more to go over, but I think about this and I read this and I couldn't believe what I read. Actually, I found it, as anybody would, really disturbing, as the Justice Department found really disturbing. But what's the arc of correction? Do you just get rid of all nepotism in police departments? Do you think that would be a curative thing, so that these people are coming out of the same homes with the same, if there's a racist cop raising a racist child, that's how things happen. You know, non-racist cops raise non-racist children, generally speaking. Does nepotism, does getting rid of that, and it's everywhere in our policing, does getting rid of that help, do you think? I mean, I don't know the answer. We see this thing, and it's brought to light in this report, and we hear about it on television, and we read about it on the internet, but I don't know what's the curative thing, other than pointing it out.
So I'll just say this, so I grew up, I come from a long line of cops. And
That's what I'm just saying, a long line of cops.
Right.
Should that line, I know it ended with you.
Should there
clearly.
be lines?
Yeah.
It should, but I don't know how you do that. You can't. You say you can't be a civil servant if your father was a civil servant, or your uncle, or your grandpa.
Well, a city could say that you can have no direct relative who's on the police force, but you can join the fire department if you want to. You can join the sanitation department. You can,
I'm all for that, but I think a bigger rule. I mean, according to Michael Wood, his suggestion
Michael J. Wood.
You have the police are now answerable to other police. When they get investigated, they're investigated by other police. What he's saying is we need to turn that over to citizens, and I agree with that. Yeah. So now cops know that they have impunity. They know that in fact, I'm not sure you're going to.
We have a little bit about that. About
beholden to the people that pay you. I mean,
and specifically about civilian oversight, there's references.
That's what we really. I mean, because cops really now act with impunity. They can do whatever they want, and we've seen it. They choke a guy in broad daylight to death. Nothing. That's how it's supposed to go down.
Yeah. Even though there were already prohibitions against that actual behavior.
Right. It is a literal jury of their peers that they face.
Exactly.
Literally.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to change. So then maybe they'll be, and you go, well, now cops are going to be gun shy. Yeah. They should be fucking gun shy.
Right.
Yes. So again, it's the lip service that we give in this culture to the respecting life. But we really don't respect life, right? And so we don't respect life in our foreign policy. We don't respect life in our domestic policy. We have a very narrow band of where we respect life, right? So yes, right, before you're born, we really respect that life, but not after, right?
Unless you've killed someone. We respect it for a while, and then if you kill someone, then we don't respect your life anymore either. Because
even if it's just blatant disrespect for other human beings in our culture. And so I think we need to change the culture. It all started with the drug war. There was a certain sect of
Point
people.
to me about that.
There's a certain sect of people who didn't deserve the Constitution. And those are, if you're extra bad, you don't deserve, you're not a person anymore. And those were people who were involved with drugs. Anybody involved with drugs, somehow you're a bad person, so bad that you don't get the protection of the Constitution. So once you can deem certain people not human, which is what that is, then they just keep extrapolating. Now, after 9/11, you could be a terrorist or a drug dealer. And so now, in fact, the Department of Homeland Security has given directives to local police departments to view peaceful protesters as potential terrorists.
Yeah, and there's some information about that as well.
Okay, so this is what's happening. So it's a culture that's why I keep saying it's a culture of policing from coast to coast. And how do we change it? A big step is to have citizen review boards. It's also who you appoint to be the heads of police departments.
Yes, let's give some more examples of some of the activity that's been going on in Baltimore. Supervisors frequently encourage officers to clear corners, quote, an instruction many officers understand to stop, disperse, or arrest groups of individuals standing on public sidewalks. The continued emphasis on these types of stats drives BPD's tendency to stop, search, and arrest significant numbers of individuals on Baltimore streets, often without requisite legal justification, and in situations that put officers in adversarial encounters that have little connection to public safety. And so, look, we're going to I think in the next section, we're going to get into the escalation of the use of force. But that starts with having a tense situation that didn't need to exist. And if you believe that one of the principal jobs that your police officer is supposed to have in an area is if you see a group of people standing on a sidewalk, you need to get them to move, that's going to create a lot more situations for force, the use of force to escalate. But let's talk about that. BPD, this is again from the Department of Justice report. BPD uses overly aggressive tactics that unnecessarily escalate encounters, increase tensions, and lead to unnecessary force, and fails to de-escalate encounters when it would be reasonable to do so. Officers frequently resort to physical force when a subject does not immediately respond to verbal commands, even where the subject poses no imminent threat to the officer or others. These tactics result from BPD's training and guidance.
So they're trained it's exactly what I've been saying. They are literally trained to escalate violence, and they're not trained to de-escalate violence. That's a big...
Even in response to just you not obeying.
Yes.
I told you to do something, you didn't do it, so now we're getting physical.
So now I'm going to inject violence into this situation. I'm the person from the state. There's no violence happening. I'm going to now inject violence into this situation.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's how they're trained. We had an argument about this. I forget who it was, but a long argument about how they're trained. Oh, it's with Ben and Jenk and me.
Yeah.
And it was about Ben was sure that they weren't trained this way, and I was sure they were. And here we are. It's been proven they're trained this way.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm glad that they specifically cite there. This is not just in some cases some bad apples will respond in a bad way. It's that this flows naturally from the sorts of both the training that they get when they're coming up and also the way that oversight is provided, or in this case, not provided by the department. But so we've been talking about some of the instances in the Justice Department report that look really bad for Baltimore. We do have some consequences we're going to be talking about. But first, I want to talk about something that Jimmy mentioned, which had to do with peaceful protesters and people exercising their constitutional rights. That also came up in this, as well as community policing, which is, many people see it as one of the ways that you could fix some of the abuses in the system, is more community-based policing. And they did recognize in the Justice Department report that some of that is going on. But unfortunately, those officers we saw interacting with the community in a positive manner did so due to their own interest, noting that such action were not mandated by command staff. That's just one small section of a much larger section showing that there is very little top-down emphasis or encouragement for the sort of community policing that a lot of people see as a potential solution.
Did they give a reason for that? Did they go back and say it's because of resources, or does it say, I mean...
They get into resources when they talk about the oversight. I didn't see it in this. I'm sure that that probably plays into it. Allocation of resources not going towards that sort of policing.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the protesters. BPD violates the First Amendment by retaliating against individuals engaged in constitutionally protected activities. Officers frequently detain and arrest members of the public for engaging in speech the officers perceive to be critical or disrespectful, and BPD officers use force against members of the public who are engaging in protected speech. Again, this is one of our protected rights in the Constitution. There seems to be very often only one of those rights that you are supposed to be vocal about protecting, even though some of them were put earlier in the list. And so people exercising First Amendment rights, whether they're protesting against the police specifically and being critical or disrespectful, or they're simply trying to organize for some political goal or something like that, the police unfortunately see it not as people exercising their constitutional rights who should be protected, who the police should be there to protect, but that they are the problem and they need to be managed, that they are a threat in some fashion.
And so, do you think these cops are born this way, or they're? I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think a lot of them they have their personality this way. They then get into a culture that rewards this kind of behavior, encourages this kind of behavior. And if you're not like this, you get out, right? So that's why when I would say, well, most cops I know are like this, people are like, oh, come on, it can't be most cops. No, if you're a good cop, you normally get the F out of there. You normally can't take it, right? And
can't take what?
You can't take the culture of policing, right? And if you do start to scream about it, they will shoot you in the face like they did to Serpico. And by the way, Serpico just last year came out and said, if you think it's over, it's worse than it's ever been. So that's what they did to Serpico in the 70s.
Why would it be over? Because they haven't done anything to make it over. There's no reason.
There's a little bit more public consciousness about some of these
I would say
things.
there's a lot more, and it's now, and it's only very recent. I mean, it's
cell
like
phone
recent
cameras
by
has helped.
by 4, 5, 6 years. Recent.
Body cameras could help, but they
turn
always
them
seem
off.
to fail. They always it's that they're just not durable instruments. And whenever you start to murder someone, they
turn
just
off.
They just turn off.
It's weird how
Who's making them?
Yeah.
Probably whoever made the Windows Phone. That thing was doomed to failure. But I would
Google
I
Glass.
do think Google Glass.
Google Glass.
No, we love Google. Google's the best. So I do think that it's a culture thing. I think that they get in there and look, in any job you want to be accepted, and there is a culture in every job. And I think that the people who have been there for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years have a lot of influence over those people that come in. And so that's why institutional practices and culture tends to be pretty durable. It lasts over time. But then also, this next section is going to get into the oversight that they're supposed to be.
Well, let's go to the peaceful protesting, though, a little bit, just for 1 second. That's not just going to change over time, either. I mean, there's something in human nature where if you're on one side of a fence and there are people doing one thing and you're supposed to be doing the other, that is not just going to change overnight. I mean, there's human nature is they're doing their thing. I'm over here doing what I'm supposed to do. It seems combative on its surface. But if the rest of the department and the rest of their training and the rest of what they're exposed to changes, it probably changes the tenor of those interactions. So that a peaceful protest at its very best would then just be something the police roll their eyes and have to deal with, as opposed to something that they think is a combative interaction.
Yeah.
It's never going to be perfect in those sorts of situations, because what are they doing? All right, they're peaceful. This is what could happen. This is what could happen. Keep these people in line. We're going to keep them as far away as possible. It's just how it's always going to be.
Yeah.
In a blanket way. But if policing changes on the whole in whatever way is being proposed, and I think Michael Wood should come in here and talk about this report specifically, or come somewhere. I'm sure he's talking about it wherever he is. But that would be a great thing for TYT to do, because seeing now this Justice Department report, and it's only about Baltimore, but you have to assume, right, that it's just about everywhere, right?
Yeah, well, there are
big
dozens
cities,
of other cities.
yeah.
There are dozens of other cities being investigated by the Justice Department
Exactly.
now.
And I'm sure the findings are not going to vary that much. Then the trickle down of that is it will affect the way that peaceful protests go. It will affect the way that parades go.
Yeah.
The stadiums, every part of policing will change if the biggest parts of policing change. And I think it's really important, because I'm not surprised at all by the protest stuff. Police are suspicious by nature, right? That's how they're brought up. The fact that they have fixed ideas of who to be suspicious of is wrong, and that has to be taught out of police, and that needs to happen. Then it will change the peaceful protest. But that was the thing I found least surprising.
Yeah. I mean, we're always like humans. We see each other in terms of our tribe, and occasionally the tribe is very insular, and sometimes we expand it out to the country and all of that. But we have these implicit assumptions about different groups of people. What you can't have is the management encouraging you to be biased and discriminatory.
To pit you against them.
Exactly. To see it as the opposite. As not a part of your community and that sort of thing. But now imagine, hypothetically, you enter the police force, and let's say you do something that leads to a complaint or something like that. If the system was functioning the way that it was supposed to, you would have some sort of censure from the management or from some sort of oversight board, and then you would adapt based on that. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen, and that can lead to an escalation of conflicts in the future when you realize that the things you do never result in any punishment. And they talk about that in the report. The department does not consistently classify, investigate, adjudicate, and document complaints of misconduct according to its own policies and accepted law enforcement standards. Instead, we found that BPD personnel discourage complaints from being filed, misclassify complaints to minimize their apparent severity, and conduct little or no investigation. The department also lacks adequate civilian oversight. And as you had mentioned, Michael, they do reference specifically there a lack of resources given to civilian oversight. Now, why would that be underfunded? Interesting the way that works out.
It's strange, right?
Yeah. Now, as a result of this report being filed today, Police Commissioner Kevin Davis said officers who committed egregious violations have been fired. I saw references to 6. I don't know if that's current. He and Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake promised the report would serve as a blueprint for sweeping changes, although they caution that those changes will take a great deal of time and possibly cost millions of dollars. So we don't know what the timeline is on reforms being made. We don't know exactly what those reforms will look like, but it looks like a lot of reforms have been called for.
Again, it's not surprising to me. What is surprising to me is how brazen they are about everything, and just don't give an F about the law, right? Yeah. So they're supposed to be. So I think that's the basic problem: is cops don't see citizens as people participating in their country that need to be protected and served. They don't see them as they need to be protected and served. They see them, most of the people in cities, especially in Baltimore, they see them as people who need to be policed and managed.
Yeah.
Right? They're not citizens who need to be served and constitutional rights need to be protected. They are people, they're a problem, and they need to be policed and managed. And that's exactly how, and so they see citizens as the enemy. They don't see the citizen as the citizen to be served. Yeah. They see they're an occupying force. There's so many problems with policing in America. And the thing that I think that really accelerated it to a great extent was 9/11. And I remember being on stage as a comedian, and I was trying to do material about, police aren't heroes like everyone thinks because of 9/11, right? The firemen are heroes, and cops are still cops, and they took these jobs because they're the best jobs they can get. They're not really caring about, and people hated to hear that stuff, right? They would, of course, I made it funnier. But still,
that was great.
I think that's what happened. So 9/11, we put cops on this pedestal, which is dangerous to do, right? You have to keep in mind who they are. We need cops. Cops are necessary, but also as necessary is a short leash. Because we have to keep in mind not only the culture of the police, but the kind of people who are attracted to that, right? Yeah. So there is a certain brutality that you have to be comfortable with, and even a lot of them enjoy to do that job. And people say, well, they want to help their community. There's lots of ways to help your community. You can become a fireman. You can teach kids to read. There's a million things you could do.
You could be a nurse.
You could be a nurse. You could be whatever. So that's one really specific way to serve your community with a gun that somebody wants to do. So let's stop that there's somehow Boy Scouts instead of what they really are.
You could be a Boy Scout.
People who are attracted to a brutal form of policing. That's what they are. Go ahead.
And 9/11 birthed this whole idea of blanket, you should feel this way about certain things.
Yes.
Like, you're only a patriot if.
Yeah.
That's when that word was redefined that day, which is absurd, right? They invented first responders that day.
Yes.
You know, and I don't really have a right. Who are the second? When are they getting here? These second responders. But so we put people in groups. If you're a cop, you're a hero. Yeah, there are hero cops.
Yes,
right.
There are hero cops.
But not every cop's a hero, and that's what and there are patriots who wave the flag, but not everyone who waves the flag is a patriot. Not everyone who doesn't wave the flag is not a patriot.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the whole. And what is a patriot, right? Honestly, what anymore? What is a patriot? Somebody who volunteer for the armed forces and protect our country.
I was just going to say people who feel incredibly strongly about the country that they come from.
Exactly.
And that's a value neutral evaluation.
What I'm
that
trying
can be
to say
bad,
is
that can
there
be
are
good.
1,000 definitions of what it is.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden they wrote one or two, and if you don't fit those, then you're not a patriot.
You have to support our troops.
I think a patriot is someone who underinflates footballs to get an advantage.
Yeah, well, I think that's true.
It's a dynasty,
really. That's all you have to do. Or you're like a tight end who kills a few people.
Maybe.
You're a patriot.
If we wanted to falsify and write up a report to describe what we think is going on in a police department, it would be much more poorly written, and it wouldn't be as comprehensive as this. Other than a sergeant saying, we're going to kill them all, it's just going to take a while, this is exactly what we've been describing for literally years on this program. And during the past 5 years or so, during the Black Lives Matter movement, there have been so many people on the opposite side saying you are 100% wrong about police. There is nothing wrong. There is no hate in their heart. There is no hate in the results. Whether you think this proves that individuals are actually racist and wish they could be in the Klan, the result is racially biased. And it's horrible for certain groups of people. And I just hope that this result, some regular people and members of the media will look at this and try to feel a little bit of empathy for what it's like to grow up in one of these communities and to see your life being affected just simply by who you are and what you look like in a million different ways as you're going about your day, and how it literally leads to people being locked up, people being harassed, and also people being killed all too often. This is exactly what needed to happen. We've been saying investigations need to be done. The ones that are done by the local police departments almost never end up with actual charges being filed. If the charges are filed, they never actually go to jail for the most part. But this is much bigger than any one case. This is a systemic look at years of manipulation of the people in these areas, and I hope that it gets the media attention it deserves.
So, you know, the Young Turks has a whole 2-hour show every single day, and you can get it ad-free if you're a member. TYTnetwork.com/join. Go.